What does it mean to be a Christian? Many think it's just a set of rules we follow because it's written in the Bible. But why do people become Christians? In today's video we explore Mere Christianity, where Lewis discusses Christian behavior in 8 wise reflections. As you know, this is the perspective of a man who studied, reflected, and lived God's Word. At the end of the video you can tell me if he is right or wrong. I assure you it's worth it. First, the 3 parts of morality. In reality, moral rules are directions for the functioning of the human machine. Each moral rule is there to prevent a breakdown, strain, or friction. In the functioning of that machine, moral perfection is an ideal in the sense that we cannot achieve it. But it's dangerous to describe a man who strives to keep the moral law as a man of high ideals, because it might lead you to think that moral perfection is his particular taste, and that the rest of us don't need to share it. You can clearly understand the idea if you think of us as a fleet of ships sailing in formation, or humanity as a band playing music. For a good result, you need 2 things. Each individual's instrument must be in tune, and each must enter at the right time to harmonize with all the others. We don't ask where the fleet is trying to go or what piece of music the band is trying to play. Morality, then, seems to be concerned with 3 things. First, with fair play and harmony between individuals. Second, with what we might call tidying up, or harmonizing things inside each individual. Third, with the general purpose of human life as a whole, what humans were made for, what course the whole fleet should be on, what tune the conductor of the band wants to play. Modern people are almost always thinking about the first thing and forgetting the other 2. When a man says about something he wants to do, it can't be wrong because it doesn't hurt anyone, he is only thinking of the first thing. What good is it to draw up, on paper, rules of social behavior, if we know that, in fact, our greed, cowardice, bad temper, and vanity will prevent us from keeping them? It's easy enough to remove the particular kinds of corruption or bullying that happen under the present system, but as long as men are cheats or bullies, they will find new ways to carry on the old game under the new system. You can't make men good by law, and without good men, you can't have a good society. Again, Christianity asserts that every individual human being will live forever, and this must be true or false. And immortality makes this other difference, which, by the way, has a connection with the difference between totalitarianism and democracy. If individuals live only 70 years, then a state or a nation or a civilization, which may last 1,000 years, is more important than an individual. But if Christianity is true, then the individual is not only more important, but incomparably more important, for he is eternal, and the life of a state or civilization, compared with his, is only a moment. It seems, then, that if we are going to think about morality, we must think of all 3 departments: relations between man and man, things inside each man, and relations between man and the power that made him. Second, the cardinal virtues. One of my main reasons for dividing morality into 3 parts was that this seemed the shortest way of covering the subject. Here I want to give an idea of another way the subject has been divided by ancient writers, which was too long to use in my talk, but which is a very good one. According to this longer scheme, there are 7 virtues. 4 of them are called cardinal virtues, and the remaining 3 are called theological virtues. The cardinal ones are those which all civilized people recognize. The theological ones are those which, as a rule, only Christians know about. I shall deal with the theological ones later. At the moment I am talking about the 4 cardinal virtues. The word cardinal has nothing to do with cardinals in the Roman Church. It comes from a Latin word meaning the hinge of a door. These were called cardinal virtues because they are, as we should say, pivotal. They are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. First, prudence. Prudence means practical common sense, taking the trouble to think out what you are doing and what is likely to come of it. Nowadays, most people hardly think of prudence as one of the virtues. In fact, because Christ said we could only get into his world by being like children, many Christians have the idea that, provided you are good, it does not matter being a fool, but that is a misunderstanding. In the first place, most children show plenty of prudence about doing the things they are really interested in, and think them out quite sensibly. In the second place, as St. Paul points out, Christ never meant that we were to remain children in intelligence. On the contrary, he told us to be not only harmless as doves, but also wise as serpents. He wants a child's heart, but a grown-up's head. He wants us to be simple, open, and affectionate as good children are, but he also wants every bit of intelligence we have to be alert at its job and in first-class fighting trim. The fact that you are giving money to a charity does not mean that you should not try to find out whether that charity is a fraud or not. The fact that you are thinking about God, for example, when you are praying, does not mean that you can be content with the same ideas that you had when you were 5. It is, of course, quite true that God will not love you less, or have less use for you. If you happen to have been born with a second-rate brain, he has room for people with very little sense, but he wants everyone to use the sense they have. Second, temperance. Temperance is, unfortunately, one of those words that have changed their meaning. It now usually means teetotalism or abstinence from alcoholic drink, but in the days when the second cardinal virtue was christened temperance, it meant nothing of the sort. Temperance referred not especially to drink, but to all pleasures, and it meant not abstaining, but going to the right length and no further. It is a mistake to think that all Christians must be teetotalers. Islam, not Christianity, is the teetotal religion. Of course, it may be the duty of a particular Christian, or of any Christian at a particular time, to abstain from strong drink, either because he is the sort of man who cannot drink at all without drinking too much, or because he is with people who are inclined to drunkenness, and must not encourage them by drinking himself. But the whole point is that he is abstaining, for a good reason, from something that he does not condemn, and which he likes to see other people enjoying. One great piece of mischief has been done by the modern restriction of the word temperance to the question of drink. It helps people to forget that you can be just as intemperate about a lot of other things. A man who makes his golf or his motor bicycle the center of his life, or a woman who devotes all her thoughts to clothes or bridge or her dog, is being just as intemperate as someone who gets drunk every evening. Third, justice. Justice means much more than the sort of thing that goes on in law courts. It is the old name for everything we should now call fairness. It includes honesty, give and take, truthfulness, keeping promises, and all that side of life. Fourth, fortitude. Fortitude includes both kinds of courage, the kind that faces danger, as well as the kind that sticks it under pain. Guts is perhaps the nearest modern English. You will notice, of course, that you cannot practice any of the other virtues for very long without bringing this one into play. The importance of quality moral character. There is one further point about the virtues that ought to be noticed. There is a difference between doing some particular just or temperate action and being a just or temperate man. Someone who is not a good tennis player may now and then make a good shot. What you mean by a good player is a man whose eyes, muscles, and nerves have been so trained by making innumerable good shots that they can now be relied on. They have a certain tone or quality which is there even when he is not playing, just as a mathematician's mind has a certain habit and outlook which is there even when he is not doing mathematics. In the same way, a man who perseveres in doing just actions gets, in the end, a certain quality of character. Now it is that quality, rather than the particular actions which we mean when we talk of a virtue. This distinction is important for the following reason. If we thought only of the particular actions, we might encourage three wrong ideas. 1. We might think that, provided you did the right thing, it did not matter how or why you did it, whether you did it willingly or unwillingly, sulkily or cheerfully, through fear of public opinion or for its own sake. But the truth is that right actions done for the wrong reason do not help to build the internal quality or character called a virtue, and it is this quality or character that really matters. 2. We might think that God wanted simply obedience to a set of rules, whereas he really wants people of a particular sort. 3. We might think that the virtues were necessary only for this present life, that in the other world we could stop being just because there is nothing to quarrel about, and stop being brave because there is no danger. Now it is quite true that there will probably be no occasion for just or courageous acts in the next world, but there will be every occasion for being the sort of people that we can become only as a result of doing such acts here. The point is not that God will refuse you admission to his eternal world if you have not got certain qualities of character. The point is that if people have not at least begun to acquire those qualities here, no possible external conditions could make a heaven for them. That is, could make them happy with the deep, strong, unshakable kind of happiness God intends for us. 3rd, social morality. The first thing to get clear about Christian morality between man and man is that in this department, Christ did not come to preach any brand new morality. The golden rule of the New Testament, do as you would be done by, is a summing up of what everyone at bottom has always known to be right. Really great moral teachers never do introduce new moralities. It is quacks and cranks who do that. As Dr. Johnson said, people need to be reminded more often than they need to be instructed. The real job of every moral teacher is to keep on bringing us back, time after time, to the old simple principles which we are all so anxious not to see. The second thing to get clear is that Christianity has not, and does not profess to have, a detailed political program for applying do as you would be done by to a particular society at a particular moment. It could not have. It is meant for all men at all times, and the particular program which suited one place or time would not suit another. And anyhow, that is not how Christianity works. When it tells you to feed the hungry, it does not give you lessons in cookery. When it tells you to read the Scriptures, it does not give you lessons in Hebrew and Greek, or even in English grammar. It was never intended to replace or supersede the ordinary human arts and sciences. It is rather a director which will set them all to the right jobs, and a source of energy which will give them all new life, if only they will put themselves at its disposal. People say, The church ought to give us a lead. That is true if they mean it in the right way, but false if they mean it in the wrong way. By the church, they ought to mean the whole body of practicing Christians. And when they say that the church should give us a lead, they ought to mean that some Christians, those who happen to have the right talents, should be economists and statesmen, and that all economists and statesmen should be Christians, and that their whole efforts in politics and economics should be directed to putting do as you would be done by into action. If that happened, and if we others were prepared to take it, then we should find the Christian solution for our own social problems pretty quickly. But this is where the church, as an organized body, has been more effective. She has tried to instruct society on economic and social matters, but every time she has done so, she has made one mistake after another. She has tried to make things too clear and definite. Consequently, when people say, the church ought to give us a lead, what they ought to mean, and very often do mean, is that some Christians, those who happen to have the right talents, should be economists and statesmen, and that all economists and statesmen should be Christians, and that their whole efforts in politics and economics should be directed to putting do as you would be done by into action. The New Testament, without going into details, gives us a pretty clear hint of what a fully Christian society would be like. Perhaps it gives us more than we can take. It tells us that there are to be no passengers or parasites. If man does not work, he ought not to eat. Everyone is to work with their own hands, and what is more, their work is to produce something good. There will be no manufacture of silly luxuries, and then of silly advertisements to persuade us to buy them. And there is to be no swank or side, no putting on airs. To that extent, a Christian society would be what we now call leftist. On the other hand, it is always insisting on obedience and outward marks of respect, from all of us to properly appointed magistrates, from children to parents, and I am afraid this is going to be very unpopular, from wives to husbands. If there were such a society in existence, and you or I visited it, I think we should come away with a curious impression. We should feel that its economic life was very socialistic, and in that sense advanced, but that its family life and its code of manners were rather old-fashioned, perhaps even ceremonious and aristocratic. Each of us would like bits of it, but I am afraid very few of us would like the whole of it. That is just what one would expect if Christianity is the total plan for the human machine. We have all departed from that total plan in different ways, and each of us wants to make out that his own modification of the original plan is the plan itself. Now another point. There is a bit of advice given to us by the ancient heathen Greeks, and by the Jews in the Old Testament, and by the great Christian teachers of the Middle Ages, which the modern economic system has completely disobeyed. All these people told us not to lend money at interest, and lending money at interest, what we call investment, is the basis of our whole system. One more point and I am done. In the passage where the New Testament says that everyone must work, it gives as a reason so that he may have something to give to those in need. Charity, giving to the poor, is an essential part of Christian morality. In the frightening parable of the sheep and the goats, it seems to be the point on which everything turns. Some people nowadays say that charity ought to be unnecessary, and that instead of giving to the poor, we ought to be producing a society in which there were no poor to give to. They may be quite right in saying that we ought to produce that kind of society. But if anyone thinks that, as a consequence, you can stop giving in the meantime, Then he has parted company with all Christian morality. And now, before I end, I am going to venture to make a guess about how this section has affected any who have read it. My guess is that there are some leftist people among them who are very annoyed that it has not gone further in that direction, and some people of an opposite sort who are annoyed because they think it has gone much too far. If so, that brings us right up against the real snag in all this drawing up of blueprints for a Christian society. Most of us are not really approaching the subject to find out what Christianity says. We are approaching it in the hope of finding support from Christianity for the views of our own party. A Christian society is not going to arrive until most of us really want it, and we are not going to want it until we become fully Christian. I may repeat, "Do as you would be done by," till I am black in the face, but I cannot really carry it out till I love my neighbor as myself, and I cannot learn to love my neighbor as myself till I learn to love God, and I cannot learn to love God except by learning to obey him. Fourth, morality and psychoanalysis. To transform society into a Christian community, each individual must strive to apply Christian principles to their own behavior, while working to integrate these principles into social structures. The transformation must occur simultaneously on both fronts, personal practice and social reform. I have said that we shall never get a Christian society unless most of us become Christian individuals. That does not mean, of course, that we can put off doing anything about society till some distant future date. It means that we must begin both jobs at once. 1. Seeing how "do as you would be done by" can be applied in detail to modern society, and 2. Becoming the sort of people who would really apply it, if we knew how. It is important to distinguish clearly between two things, between the medical theories and techniques of psychoanalysts and the philosophical view of the world that Freud and some others have added to that. Psychoanalysis as a medical technique has value in itself and can be beneficial. However, Freud's philosophical interpretations should not be confused with medical practice. Freud, by extrapolating his medical theories into philosophy, enters terrain where he is not an expert, and his philosophical views should be considered separately from his medical contributions. When a man makes a moral choice, two things are involved. One is the act of choosing. The other is the various feelings, impulses, and so on that his psychological outfit presents to him, and which are the raw material of his choice. Morality involves the active choice of an individual and the psychological impulses that influence that choice. These impulses can be natural or abnormal due to subconscious influences. The moral choice is the crucial point of morality, and psychoanalysis can help by providing a better psychological state. But the final moral decision rests with the individual. Psychoanalysis aims to treat abnormal feelings so that a person has a healthier emotional base from which to make choices. Morality, however, is focused on the choices themselves. Thus, psychoanalysis can prepare the ground, but the responsibility for moral choices lies with the individual. What psychoanalysis undertakes to do is to remove abnormal feelings, that is, to give the man better raw material for his acts of choice. Morality is concerned with the acts of choice themselves. Psychological disturbances are seen as conditions to be treated, not as moral failures. While people tend to judge based on visible actions, God evaluates the moral intent behind the choices, considering the effort and courage required to overcome internal difficulties. Bad psychological material is not a sin, but a disease. It does not need to be repented of, but to be cured. And by the way, that is very important. Human beings judge one another by their external actions. God judges them by their moral choices. Human judgment is limited because we only see the exterior of actions, not the effort and internal circumstances. God, however, judges based on what each person does with the internal conditions and challenges they face, offering a fairer and more understanding judgment. That is why Christians are told not to judge. We see only the results which a man's choices make out of his raw material. But God does not judge him by the raw material, but by what he has done with it. Christian morality should not be seen as a system of rewards and punishments, but as a continuous process of personal transformation. Each moral choice shapes the character of the individual, making him more aligned with God and goodness, or the opposite. People often think of Christian morality as a kind of bargain in which God says, "If you keep a lot of rules, I'll reward you, and if you don't, I'll do the other thing." I do not think that is the best way of looking at it. Each moral decision influences and shapes the core of our being, affecting who we become over time. This continuous transformation guides us to become beings more aligned with good or evil. Every time you make a choice, you are turning the central part of you, the part of you that chooses, into something a little different from what it was before. We are constantly moving towards becoming more heavenly or hellish beings. Our daily choices draw us closer to a state of harmony with God and others, or a state of conflict and isolation. Each of us, at each moment, is progressing to one state or the other. The understanding of good and evil is linked to our moral state. The closer we get to good, the more clearly we understand both good and evil. As we move away from good, we lose the ability to discern between the two, becoming blind to our own wickedness. Good people know about both good and evil. Bad people do not know about either. Fifth, sexual morality. The Christian rule of chastity must not be confused with the social rule of modesty, that is, propriety or decency. The social rule of propriety fixes how much of the human body should be displayed and about what subjects it is polite to talk, and in what words according to the customs of a particular social circle. Thus, while the rule of chastity is the same for all Christians at all times, the rule of propriety changes. Chastity is the most unpopular of the Christian virtues. There is no getting away from it. The Christian rule is either marriage with complete faithfulness to your partner, or else total abstinence. Now this is so difficult and so contrary to our instincts, that obviously either Christianity is wrong, or our sexual instinct, as it now is, has gone wrong, one or the other. Of course, being a Christian, I think it is the instinct which has gone wrong. The biological purpose of sex is children, just as the biological purpose of eating is to repair the body. Now, if we eat whenever we feel inclined, and as much as we want, it is true that most of us will eat too much, but not terrifically too much. That appetite is in ludicrous and preposterous excess of its function. You can get a large audience together for a strip-tease act, that is, to watch a girl undress on the stage. Now, suppose you came to a country where you could fill a theatre simply by bringing a covered plate onto the stage and then slowly lifting the cover so as to let everyone see, just before the lights went out, that it contained a mutton chop or a bit of bacon. Would you not think that in that country something had gone wrong with the appetite for food? The perversions of the sexual instinct are numerous, hard to cure, and dreadful. People often say, Sexual desire is nothing to be ashamed of. They may mean two things. They may mean there is nothing to be ashamed of in the fact that the human race reproduces itself in a certain way, nor in the fact that it gives pleasure. If they mean that, they are right. Christianity says the same. Posters after posters, film after film, novel after novel associate the idea of sexual indulgence with ideas of health, normality, youth, frankness, and good humor. For any happiness, even in this world, quite a lot of restraint will be necessary. So the claim made by every desire, when it is strong, to be healthy and reasonable, counts for nothing. We may indeed be sure that perfect chastity, like perfect charity, will not be attained by any merely human efforts. You must ask for God's help. Even when you do, it may seem for a long time that no help, or less help than you need, is being given. Never mind. After each failure, ask forgiveness, pick yourself up, and try again. Those who are seriously attempting chastity are more conscious and soon know a lot more about their own sexuality than anyone else. They come to know their desires as Wellington knew Napoleon, or as Sherlock Holmes knew Moriarty, as a rat catcher knows about rats, or a plumber about leaky pipes. Virtue, even attempted virtue, brings light. Indulgence brings fog. Finally, though I have had to speak at length about sex, I want to make as clear as possible that the center of Christian morality is not here. If anyone thinks that Christians regard unchastity as the supreme vice, he is quite wrong. The sins of the flesh are bad, but they are the least bad of all sins. All the worst pleasures are purely spiritual. The pleasure of putting other people in the wrong, of bossing and patronizing and spoiling sport, and backbiting, the pleasures of power, of hatred. Sixth, Christian marriage. The Christian idea of marriage is based on Christ's words that a man and a woman are to be regarded as a single organism, for that is what the words one flesh mean. The inventor of the human machine was telling us that its two halves, the male and the female, were made to be combined together in pairs, not simply on the sexual level, but totally combined. As a consequence, Christianity teaches that marriage is for life. There is, of course, a difference between different churches. Some do not admit divorce at all. Others allow it reluctantly in very special cases. Justice, as I said before, includes keeping promises. Everyone who has been married in a church has made a public, solemn promise to stick to their partner till death. What we call being in love is a glorious state, and in several ways good for us. Being in love is a good thing, but it is not the best thing. Love in this second sense, love distinct from being in love, is not merely a feeling. It is a deep unity maintained by the will and deliberately strengthened by habit. My own view is that the churches should frankly recognize that the majority of the British people are not Christians, and therefore cannot be expected to live Christian lives. There ought to be two distinct kinds of marriage, one governed by the state, with rules enforced on all citizens, the other governed by the church, with rules enforced by her on her own members. The need for some head follows from the idea that marriage is permanent. If there must be a head, why the man? Well, firstly, is there any serious wish that it should be the woman? There must be something unnatural about the rule of wives over husbands, because the wives themselves are half ashamed of it, and despise the husbands whom they rule. Seventh, the great sin. Pride or self-conceit is a vice that no man in the world is free of. Everyone in the world loathes this vice when they see it in someone else, and hardly any people, except Christians, ever imagine that they are guilty of it themselves. There is no fault which makes a man more unpopular, and no fault which we are more unconscious of in ourselves. And the more we have it ourselves, the more we dislike it in others. According to Christian teachers, the essential vice, the utmost evil, is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. Pride is essentially competitive by its very nature, while the other vices are competitive only by accident. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. We say that people are proud of being rich, or clever, or good-looking, but they are not. They are proud of being richer, or cleverer, or better-looking than others. If everyone else became equally rich, or clever, or good-looking, there would be nothing to be proud about. It is the comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. Once the element of competition has gone, pride has gone. A proud man will take your girl from you, not because he wants her, but just to prove to himself that he is a better man than you. Pride is always competitive, and that is why it is destructive. Almost all the evils in the world which people put down to greed or selfishness are really far more the result of pride. Pride has been the chief cause of misery in every nation and every family since the world began. Other vices may sometimes bring people together. You may find good fellowship and jokes and friendliness among drunken people or unchaste people, but pride always means enmity. It is enmity, and not only enmity between man and man, but enmity to God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. How is it that people who are quite obviously eaten up with pride can say they believe in God and appear to themselves very religious? I am afraid it means they are worshipping an imaginary God. They theoretically admit themselves to be nothing in the presence of this phantom God, but are really all the time imagining how he approves of them and thinks them far better than ordinary people. Whenever we find that our religious life is making us feel that we are good, above all, that we are better than someone else, I think we may be sure that we are being acted on, not by God, but by the devil. The real test of being in the presence of God is that you either forget about yourself altogether, or see yourself as a small, dirty object. It is better to forget about yourself altogether. Pleasure in being praised is not pride. The child who is patted on the back for doing a lesson well, the woman whose beauty is praised by her lover, the saved soul to whom Christ says, "Well done," is pleased and ought to be. For here the pleasure lies not in what you are, but in the fact that you have pleased someone you wanted, and rightly wanted, to please. The trouble begins when you pass from thinking, "I have pleased him, all is well," to thinking, "What a fine person I must be to have done it." The more you delight in yourself and the less you delight in the praise, the worse you are becoming. When you delight wholly in yourself and do not care about the praise at all, you have reached the bottom. That is why vanity, though it is the sort of pride that shows most on the surface, is really the least bad and most pardonable sort. The vain person wants praise, applause, admiration, and too much, and is always angling for it. It is a fault, but a childish fault, and in an odd way, a humble fault. It shows that you are not yet completely contented with your own admiration. To love and admire anything outside yourself is to take one step away from utter spiritual ruin. though we shall not be well so long as we love and admire anything more than we love and admire God. Pride in something external to yourself, such as your son, father, school, or regiment, can be a good, healthy thing if it means a warm-hearted admiration. It is then not competitive pride, but this does not mean that you are giving yourself airs and graces on the ground of that. But if it means giving yourself airs on it, then it becomes a fault. Still, it is a fault better than being proud simply of yourself. To love and admire anything outside yourself is to take one step away from utter spiritual ruin, though we shall not be well so long as we love and admire anything more than we love and admire God. Do not imagine that if you meet a really humble man, he will be what most people call humble nowadays. He will not be a sort of greasy, smarmy person who is always telling you that, of course, he is nobody. Probably all you will think about him is that he seemed a cheerful, intelligent chap who took a real interest in what you said to him. If you do dislike him, it will be because you feel a little envious of anyone who seems to enjoy life so easily. He will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all. We must not think pride is something God forbids because he is offended at it, or that humility is something he demands as due to his own dignity, as if God himself was proud. He is not in the least worried about his dignity. The point is, he wants you to know him, wants to give you himself, and he and you are two things of such a kind that if you really get into any kind of touch with him, you will, in fact, be humble, delightedly humble, feeling the infinite relief of having, for once, got rid of all the silly nonsense about your own dignity, which has made you restless and unhappy all your life. He is trying to make you humble in order to make this moment possible, trying to take off a lot of silly, ugly, fancy dress in which we have all got ourselves up, and are strutting about like the little idiots we are. Eighth, is Christianity hard or easy? The Christian idea of putting on Christ, or first dressing up as a son of God in order to finally become a real son, is fundamental in Christianity. This is not one among many tasks that a Christian has to do. It is the whole of Christianity. The essence of the Christian faith is to transform into a reflection of Christ, internalizing his virtues and behavior until they become natural and innate. This process of transformation goes beyond mere external actions and touches the core of the individual's being, shaping them into the image of Christ. Before becoming Christians, our conception of morality is based on our desires and personal interests. We admit that something greater, whether called morality, decent behavior, or the good of society, has claims on ourself. However, the Christian approach is radically different. Christ does not ask for just parts of our time, money, or work. He wants all of us. Christianity does not aim to merely suppress our natural desires, but to transform them completely. Christ seeks to replace our natural self with a new self, shaped in his image. This process is not a mere superficial modification, but a complete renewal, requiring the total surrender of our desires, both those we consider innocent and those we consider evil. Christ describes the Christian walk in two ways, sometimes as very hard, sometimes as very easy. He calls us to take up our cross, symbolizing a path of sacrifice and death to self. On the other hand, he says his yoke is easy and his burden is light, suggesting that following him brings rest and relief. Both descriptions are true. Following Christ requires courage and sacrifice, but it also brings a peace and lightness that the path of self-sufficiency can never provide. Just as the lazy boy who, in the end, works harder because he didn't make the initial effort to understand the lesson. Resisting complete surrender to Christ ends up being more exhausting than total surrender. Surrendering our whole self, all our desires and precautions to Christ, is an almost impossible task, but it is the essence of Christianity. Trying to keep our natural self while attempting to be good results in frustration and failure. Christ teaches us that we cannot produce true fruits without a complete transformation, which goes beyond the surface, like a field that must be plowed and replanted to produce wheat. Our lives must be completely transformed to reflect God's will. True Christian change requires deep and comprehensive surrender, a total giving of ourselves to Christ. The real challenge of the Christian life begins each morning. As we wake up, our desires and hopes for the day attack us like wild animals, and the first task of the day is to put them into perspective, listening to God's voice and adopting his vision for our day. This is a continuous effort throughout the day, turning away from our natural anxieties and concerns and allowing God's peace to flow into us. This process of surrender and focus on God must be renewed daily, moment by moment. Christian transformation is not superficial, but deep and comprehensive. While paint stays on the surface, dye penetrates deeply. Similarly, the Christian life is not just a superficial veneer of moral behavior, but a radical change that permeates our entire being. In the moments when we allow Christ to work in us, the new life begins to spread through our whole system. Christ calls us to be perfect, to seek the complete transformation he offers. This process is challenging, but infinitely more rewarding than any superficial commitment we might seek. The church exists to draw men to Christ, to make them little Christs. If it is not doing that, all the cathedrals, clergy, missions, sermons, and even the Bible itself are simply a waste of time. God became man for no other purpose. The church must focus exclusively on leading people to Christ and helping them become more like him. All its efforts and activities must be directed toward this end and nothing else. The Bible suggests that when we are drawn to Christ, many other things in nature will begin to set right. The nightmare will be over, and it will be morning. This implies that the transformation of human beings into Christ has a broader impact, affecting all of creation. When we align ourselves with Christ, not only our lives but the world around us begins to transform. This vision of final restoration gives us hope and purpose, motivating us to seek our transformation in Christ with determination and joy. Now tell us your opinion. Is it difficult or easy to be a Christian? Let us know in the comments. In this same book, he talks about forgiveness, charity, hope, and faith. On our channel, we've covered all but charity, which you can find in our playlist that I'll leave at the end of the video. Now, I'd like to present Christian behavior according to the Bible and as highlighted in the Bible. Christian behavior reflects the teachings and character of Christ. Here are some verses that serve as guides for Christians in their daily lives, shaping their actions, attitudes, and relationships. Love and compassion. Jesus taught us to love one another, and this love is the distinguishing mark of his disciples. In John 13:34-35 he said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, reinforces this idea of kindness and mercy. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. Ephesians 4:32. Humility and service. Humility is an essential characteristic of a Christian. Paul exhorts the Philippians, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." Philippians 2, 3, 4. Jesus is the supreme example of service, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Mark 10:45. Purity and holiness. Holiness is a call for all Christians. But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, "You shall be holy, for I am holy." 1 Peter 1:15-16. Furthermore, Paul reminds us of the importance of keeping our bodies pure. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. Honesty and integrity. Honesty is fundamental in the Christian life. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. Proverbs 12:22. Paul advises the Ephesians, "Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another." Ephesians 4:25. Patience and long-suffering. Patience is a virtue that must be cultivated. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and, if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Colossians 3:12-13. The fruits of the Spirit include patience, as Paul reminds us, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Galatians 5:22-23. Obedience and faithfulness to God. Obedience to God's commandments is an expression of love for him. Jesus said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." John 14:15. Paul exhorts the Romans to live sacrificial and transformed lives. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Romans 12:1-2. Now, as always, I want to invite everyone to a moment of prayer. This is a short but powerful prayer. Dear God, we thank you for your infinite wisdom and love. We ask that you bless our minds and hearts with clarity so that we may discern your way amidst the world's confusions. Give us the wisdom to make just decisions, the intelligence to understand your word and apply it to our lives, and the discernment to distinguish good from evil. Fill us with empathy so we can love and understand our brothers as you love us. Strengthen our will to follow your ways, living according to the teachings of Jesus Christ. May our actions reflect your goodness and our faith in you, serving as an example to others. May we be beacons of your light, guiding others closer to you. In Jesus' name we ask for these blessings. Amen. Thank you very much for watching our video and participating in this prayer. I hope you enjoyed this video, as the majority was just Lewis's work. May God bless each of you and your families. See you in the next video.